I'm back. Hi. So, in my last video, I talked about my pregnancy story. Now I'm going to talk about my birth story. In my last video, I explained that in my monitoring session, they told me that I needed to go to the hospital and be induced, and I was 37 weeks and 3 days. So I was induced around 6 p.m. at night. Before I got there, I obviously called James and told him that I needed to be induced 3 weeks before I was supposed to. I was induced at 6 p.m. that night. So when you check into the hospital, they take your ID and your insurance and whatnot, and then they take you to the room. And right when I walked in, my first thought was, this is the room that my baby's going to be born in, which is a weird sensation. They put you in a gown, and then they hooked me up to monitors, including the blood pressure monitor, which at the time when they hooked me up, I think was going off every minute. And they put in an IV to start the Pitocin. The first nurse that came in to put in my IV messed it up. She messed it up twice. So I got poked 3 times. And she had to call in another nurse to finally put it in. Which every time the blood pressure thing went off, it was in the same arm that the blood pressure thing was in at first. We had to switch it because so much pressure would build up in my hand where the IV was. And then they switched it to, it was checking my blood pressure every 5 minutes instead of every minute. So I don't really remember a lot of this because eventually I started to become so exhausted. So my word of advice is, right when you get to the hospital, if you're being induced, sleep then. Because I waited way too long and then I wasn't able to sleep because I was in so much pain. Sleep and eat right when you get there if they allow you. But yeah, I don't have a very good memory of all of this, and I could be wrong about the time frame, and I could be missing a couple of things. James and my family would know a lot better. But the next thing on my notes skips right to they broke my water around 3 a.m. I think before that I kind of I had a meal. I didn't really like it, so I didn't eat much. So yeah, they broke my water around 3 a.m. to get things going a little bit because I don't think I was dilating any more than 4 at the time. I'm not sure. Then I decided I was gonna get my epidural around 6 a.m. I don't remember how far dilated I was, but they said do it sooner rather than later because it does take a while for the person who does it to come up and actually do it. Sometime after getting my epidural, I started having back labor. So his skull was to my spine, if that makes sense. So they called it a sunny side up baby because he came out with his face up, which isn't normal, but it's not the end of the world. And that's what caused back labor for me. When I started getting back labor, that's when I noticed that my epidural wasn't working fully, and I kept pressing the button. They give you a button that gives you a little bit more just in case you're in a lot of pain. My epidural was only working. It worked where it really needed to, which was my pelvis and below, but at the same time, when you're having back labor, at the time I almost felt like I wanted to be having regular labor, which my mom agrees with me. She's had both kinds of labor, and back labor's worse. It was just such an overwhelming, uncomfortable pain, and no matter what position they put you in, it doesn't fix it. They tried the peanut ball on me. They tried putting me in different positions. The bed that I was in moved all the way up into a vertical position, so you're sitting like in a chair, and they tried that and nothing was helping this back labor. And my epidural was only working on the right side of my body, so I felt all that back labor on the left side of my body. Like, it started to become so overwhelming at one point that I just started throwing up. They always try and tell you to do the breathing correctly, breathe for the baby, but I've always had an issue with panic attacks and anxiety attacks. So I started to have a panic attack because my nose was stuffed, and they told me to breathe through my nose and breathe out through my mouth. And I took that so seriously. At the time, I was so sleep deprived and I couldn't breathe through my nose, so that gave me a panic attack. Somebody came in to start setting up the table, and when they start setting up the table, that means you're getting pretty close. And I think at that time they had checked. They waited a long time to check because it does no good just checking all the time to see how dilated I was. So then at that point, I was 9.5 dilated and 100% effaced. But the problem was there was 2 doctors on call at that time, and there were several emergency C-sections that were happening. And when they started setting up the table and I started getting really close to starting to push, both of the doctors were in an emergency C-section. So what ended up happening is this nurse, I loved this nurse. She was amazing, and I'm so glad that she was the one helping me with this. She decided to have me start pushing. My fiance was involved with the pushing a lot more than either of us had anticipated, and I don't know if that was because there was no doctors in the room at the time, or if that's what they normally do, but I had no idea that he would be holding my leg along with coaching me and being emotional support. He was holding my leg and we were counting together. They told me that she could tell that I had a very healthy diet by my muscles down there, and she could tell. She asked me if I was very athletic, and I told her that I used to be, and she was like, well, your muscles definitely remember how to be athletic. As far as pushing went, I don't really remember because I was hyperventilating in between contractions. So you obviously push on the contraction to help get them out. As soon as I would stop pushing, I was hyperventilating, and they told me to keep breathing for the baby, and I just don't understand how anybody could not hyperventilate. I was so exhausted from pushing that hard. The feeling of pushing really feels like you have to take the biggest dump of your life. TMI, I know. And nothing relieves it except for pushing. Back to the thing with the doctors not being in the room, I pushed until he was crowned, and that's when they had to call in a doctor to deliver. So they made it right in time. Like, my mom was standing outside of the door wondering what was going on, and the doctor was like putting on scrubs, and he was crowning, and he was like, well, I'm putting on scrubs right now, so that must mean she's ready to deliver. Both doctors ended up being able to come in and deliver my baby. But I did have a 1st-degree tear, and I know exactly when it happened. I felt it, but my epidural saved me from the pain. I knew when it happened, and I like shot up a little bit and like looked the doctor right in the eye, like, what the heck just happened? And he was like, just a little tear, it's fine. And it was his shoulders, and like, everyone thinks that the head is like the hardest part to push out, but shoulders are much wider. I started pushing, I think, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was born at 3:53 p.m. He was born at 3:53 and 6 pounds and 8.8 ounces. He was 18.5 inches. And I opted for skin to skin. So they put him on my chest. They unsnapped the gown and put him on my chest. And a bunch of things were happening at the time. You have a specific nurse just for the baby, then you have the nurse for you, and there's 2 doctors in there, and I was being sewn up at the same time. Like, so much was happening. And then he peed on me. And I remember saying to them, did he just pee on me? And they're like, oh yeah, that happens a lot. The first thing that he did to me, thank you very much, Hayden, for peeing on me. And then James went out to tell the family that he was born. And then I was completely alone in the room with him, and that's when I cried. I was all alone with him, and I cried. He's so cute and so little. So that is pretty much my whole birth story as far as I can remember. I'm sure I'm leaving out a lot of details, but I was so tired. I don't remember a whole lot. Anyway, the next video that I want to film is going to be about the recovery. I didn't want to put it in this video because I thought that would be a pretty long video. I'm already at 20 minutes. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you watch the next one. Bye.